first I want to kind of like emphasize what I think my role is on this board, just to be really clear. So I believe my role is to look at the chapters that come through this board and determine if it is taking all of the information collected over the public engagement processes, and that it zooms out and looks at the community at large and writes the chapter in a way that takes those different voices into account. I believe that the staff have done an excellent job in taking those different voices into consideration. I also want to reiterate that Montana Land Use Planning Act was updated in 2023, or was updated to require accountability in communities to ensure that the process is more representative and that things like land use, housing, and economics are done in a way that has data behind it and represents the public as a whole. Before the passing of Montana Land Use Planning Act, there was little to no teeth behind our growth policies, which in turn led to not only unpredictability in how communities grew, because depending on who is on council and who shows up to planning and city council meetings, determine how and where communities grow. I think that is extremely important that this board recognizes that while the people who show up to these individual meetings and email each meeting, voices are important, that there are huge swaths of the community members that do not have the capacity to show up and engage in each individual meeting, and therefore it is imperative that we look to the larger public engagement processes that have been done and weigh the feedback in those meetings in a way that does not give outsized influence to those who are able to show up to these individual meetings. There is a ton of research across the nation that show that the people who have time to show up to local board meetings and government meetings largely tend to be older, tend to be homeowners, and tend to be wealthier. Again, I want to reiterate, while these voices are important, they are part of the conversation, they should not represent the community as a whole. What individual feedback we get needs to be folded into the commentary from the public at large and integrated appropriately. When we allow those who have the most time to show up to these individual processes, we undermine the public's trust that these processes are meant to represent the community as a whole. I will continue to beat this drum of the need to recognize who is not in the room and why they may not be in the room. I will continue to express my frustration around the ways in which this process is being discussed on this board because of the way that it appears to be missing the mark on what we are supposed to be doing here as the board that oversees the Whitefish Growth Policy update. I think it also is important to understand that for some, it is very much not a choice to go elsewhere to get goods and services from surrounding communities. If we want people to support local businesses, then providing the opportunity within this document to allow for expansion of locally owned goods and services, when there is not goods and services locally, it is often leads people to shop online, or like you said, go to Kalispell to go get goods and services. And so again, there are people in our community that don't have access to transportation, who are older. There's a variety of reasons why people may not have a choice on whether or not they go elsewhere to get goods and services. I think when we are thinking about this economic development and the pushback from some in this community around creating opportunities to diversify our economy, it is important to put it in perspective. Whitefish has been for a long time a hard place to find a career that pays well for the bulk of residents. In the past, the cost of living was lower enough that there were opportunities for many people who didn't make a lot of money to purchase a home and settle roots in the community that people grew up in or moved to. Today, if your family is not wealthy, if you are not wealthy, or if you don't move out of town, largely out of state, and make your wealth elsewhere and come back, it is very unlikely that you will be able to make enough money on largely service industry and tourism-based wages that you will be able to buy a home in this community. That's a huge problem to me. I hear all of the time people from across the economic spectrum say they don't want to be Aspen. And like we've talked about, like we're heading down that road, right? And we really need to take seriously the public feedback we have gotten that comes through the economic development chapter and allows for opportunities of economic diversification. Economic diversification does not have to harm tourism. And in fact, the opportunity for economic diversification will likely increase the community as a whole's perspective about tourism. Tourism now, for many in our community, represents the reason our community has gentrified since 2020. As a generation Whitefish resident, which I don't say lightly. I don't like to throw that term around. It doesn't feel inclusive. But I do think it's a really important point that I make right now. As someone who was nurtured by 3 generations of my family, who grew up in Whitefish during different generations, I'm tired of hearing the character of Whitefish when if my grandpa was an adult right now working on the railroad, he would not be able to stay in Whitefish. I want to caution the use of character of the community, as to me it often signals that it's just about building and forgets the generation of people who were working class people, and those same working class people today are not being considered in many of the comments. Growing up in this community, my mom, my grandpa, and my great grandma told me stories of neighborhood commercial that existed in this community. Some on Summers Avenue, some by City Beach. The desire to allow for commercial uses such as cafes or corner grocery stores is not a new thing to Whitefish. In fact, it is not the historical roots of our community. Neighborhood commercial is also an amazing way for our neighbors to feel connected to one another. And after COVID, in which a lot of people began to see newcomers as the enemy, allowing commercial and residential creates an opportunity for Whitefish to start to mend the harms that were done by the rapid growth we experienced over COVID.